since the 1920s, despite Congress's attempt to create restrictions with the passage of the 1978 Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. In its first 33 years, FISA courts only denied 12 warrants out of more than 34,000 requests. In the private sector, businesses such as Google and Facebook surveil citizens by collecting and analyzing their personal data, often by burying data collection clauses within long end-user agreements. On the other hand, services like Clearview AI, a facial recognition app, invade individuals' privacy by collecting publicly available photographs. Recently, the courts have had to address threats to the right to privacy and reproductive freedom from state governments in cases such as Planned Parenthood versus Casey, Whole Woman's Health versus Hellerstedt, June Medical Services versus Russo, and recent state bans on abortion. Internationally, China and South Korea have responded to the spread of COVID-19 by using invasive tracking measures. In the US, local, state, and federal governments are now struggling with balancing the privacy interest of its citizens against containing the disease.
Legislatures and the judiciary have taken steps to protect citizens' privacy. The Supreme Court has extended privacy protections through the First, Third, Fourth, Fifth, and Ninth Amendments. Federal and state legislatures have also passed their own privacy protections. The Supreme Court has limited how government uses technology in its investigations. In cases like Katz versus the United States, Kylo versus the United States versus Jones, and Carpenter versus the United States, the court held that wiretapping, use of thermal imaging technology, and tracking devices, as well as the seizure of cell phone records without a warrant, all violated the Fourth Amendment. Separate from searches and seizures, the Supreme Court has established that the Constitution protects certain unenumerated rights through the doctrine of substantive due process. Cases such as Griswold versus Connecticut, Roe versus Wade, and Lawrence versus Texas have applied this doctrine to protect the right to contraception, abortion, and sexual freedom. Legislatures have also passed regulations protecting their citizens from invasions of privacy. HIPAA protects health and medical information, while the California Consumer Privacy Act imposes restrictions on corporate data collection policies. Justice Brandeis argued that the right to be left alone is the most comprehensive of rights and the right most valued by civilized men. Unfortunately, as Brandeis predicted almost a century ago, technology has outpaced lawmakers' ability to protect Americans' privacy. Thank you, and we are ready for your questions.
Very good. Should we be engaged in an effort to limit access to internet communications and the like when we know that foreign governments have collected data and have otherwise attempted to interfere with one of the most basic rights of Americans, and that is the right to elect their representatives in government? In other words, have they interfered with our elections? And if so, should we be even more vigilant in terms of protecting our form of government?
Well, go ahead, Chris. I would certainly agree that influence from foreign nations, especially Russia, on social media sites using bot accounts, such as Twitter and Facebook, is of great concern to our democracy. However, I would argue that it's the responsibility of those social media corporations to not government, but those corporations, it's their role to be restricting these bot accounts from foreign influencers.
Of course, protecting our democracy is massively important. I think it falls onto the rights or the citizens and making sure that they follow through on their civic duty to engage with the government. And I think it's important that we lobby our senators to pass legislation to force these private corporations to be more restrictive. Senator John Hopsey, I believe it was, tried to pass legislation in 2019 shifting social media platforms to publishers under Section 230 of the Communication Decency Act. However, I'm fairly sure that attempted reform did not pass the Senate.
I believe my colleague is referring to Senator Josh Hawley from Missouri.
Let me jump in with a question, if I may. You mentioned in your remarks that the public needs to be more protective or more vigorous in the protection of privacy. However, given the significant number who engage in social media, who have access to cell phones, haven't we vacated our vigorous protection of privacy by participating with that type of technology?
I don't think we do. It used to be the old standard that once you've associated with a business and you've given them information through the third-party doctrine, you don't expect that same privacy. However, in a recent ruling in Carpenter versus US, Supreme Court decided that that isn't always true, especially with the particularity and small detail of the data that's collected. Many US citizens don't understand the full details of how they're being tracked, and therefore they're not able to fully understand and adjust and compensate to protect their privacy accordingly.
In Carpenter versus the US, the Supreme Court held 5-4 that the FBI needed a warrant to ask for data pertaining to the cellular location of a suspect, and they needed a Fourth Amendment before getting that data from a third party.
I think it's also important. Oh, sorry.
I'm going to jump in if that's okay, Chris. The question I have is that you mentioned Carpenter, and you all are very well informed young people, but how do we get the public, how do we inform the public if they're not going to read through these lengthy, click here if you accept the terms? What kind of legislation do we pass to protect the privacy while still promoting, the common good, especially with something like COVID right now?
So I think to answer your question, we're going to have to look at sort of legislation like the California Consumer Privacy Act. In this, California passed legislation that's really comprehensive, and it goes through things like what companies need to do to get consent to track data and to collect data. It goes through mechanisms to remove that data from their sites or to not have it collected at all. And it also offers methods of ramifications and penalties for the companies.
I would kind of disagree with Chris and the premise of that question there. If people are not willing to be, if the American people are not willing to be proactive in protecting their privacy, it's not really the role of their elected officials, the elected representatives in Congress or any other legislative body to be passing these sorts of regulations that clearly the people aren't that interested or concerned about.
There seems to be significant social concern with regard to the Patriot Act and other means of surveillance that have been given to the federal government. Do we have, again, freedom of our elections in our society when we have the ruling in Citizens United versus FEC that said big companies can spend a lot of money promoting social issues that are favorable to a particular candidate? Should we continue to honor that freedom of speech, or should we be more restrictive through legislation with regard to access to the internet?
I would say that restricting the people's right to the internet, or it's maybe not a right, but restricting access to the internet is definitely a wrong thing. People have the right to interact with others and access the marketplace of free ideas, which has shifted from standard public squares to the internet. I think 90% of millennials get their information from sources on social media sites, which is on the internet, such as Facebook, Snapchat, or Instagram. So restricting internet is not, I don't think, an option.
I would also say Sorry, Max,
I would
go ahead.
disagree with my colleague. I think we need to take firmer restrictions. Like you mentioned, stuff like Citizens United versus the Federal Elections Commission, things like that create and inflate the marketplace and disrupt the marketplace of ideas. The old theory that Justice Holmes penned used to be that individuals could, may I finish my thought?
You can finish that sentence.
That individuals' thoughts would naturally rise to the top, but the creation of the internet has changed that. Thank you.
How about a round of applause for this panel? I would begin by congratulating you on the hard work you obviously have done. I want to congratulate you for staying in this form of competition. I am a great believer in this program and what it does for our young people. I've been involved in this program for 26 years, and I can only tell you that I will continue to be dedicated to it because what I'm seeing is the education of young, informed, involved citizens. Your study of these terribly critical current issues will make you at the forefront of educating your fellow citizens and your society with regard to these issues. I thought you made some very interesting points. You cited some key cases, Katz, Kelo, Carpenter. Griswold, Lawrence, so forth and so on. But I was particularly interested in your approach to the fact that citizens should insist on having their government administer the companies that deal with artificial intelligence in order to protect our rights and our privacy and the like. I can only hope that that happens so long as these companies remain heavy contributors to our political campaigns and the like. I have some concern that that new legislation will actually occur. But in any event, as long as citizens continue to put pressure on each level of their government, hopefully we can get some kind of control on the invasion of our privacy. Again, thank you for your hard efforts. I'll turn the rest of the comments over to my colleagues.
Thank you, Les. Well done, all of you. I'm particularly impressed, and you leave us with great hope for the future, given your ability to adapt to the situation rather than being in person, we were discussing in a break. And also, I do appreciate the way in which you contrasted your various viewpoints. I think in particular, it's interesting to note that you are the social media generation, but yet some of you seem to are anti-social media, which surprises me greatly because you live for social media and you share so much on social media that you give up so much privacy, but very well done.
I echo what both Les and Gus have said. I want to say that it is impressive, Max, that you had IT issues and that your cohort, Chris, was going to go on, press forward. I'm sure that was terrifying for both Chris and Ben, but that you persevered and you jumped right back on. I saw you guys sweating bullets. Do not worry. I wanted to put all of your minds to ease that there are no point deductions for IT issues. We just count it from the moment that the time started. So I wanted to put your minds to ease, okay? We know that this is a tricky platform. We're still getting used to the mute, the unmute, the pressing of the buttons. So I do not type like that, I promise. But I just want to let you guys know that you are incredibly impressive young people. I am so proud at how thoughtful you are, that you guys disagree, and it's a genuine sense of disagreeing. I think, Max, you're the rogue in the group, it appears. That's probably why you had IT issues. The government's tracking you because of your thoughts. That's what's going on. So I hope that you guys will continue to stay involved, stay informed, and I look forward to all the remarkable things that you're going to do in your lives.